Violence and looting that we saw play itself out across the country last week are reflecting the deep-rooted problems of poverty and inequality in South Africa. The country has already been battling a third wave of the pandemic and the economic pain of unemployment. But now South Africans have had to deal with the mental and emotional impact of the looting and unrest. Dr Shaquir Salduker, a member of the South African Society of Psychiatrists, joins me now to discuss this. Thank you very much, Dr Salduker, for your time. So in the past days, we've spoken to a number of experts about PTSD resulting from witnessing looting and unrest, and that might be on the one extreme end of the scale. But tell us what's on the other end and in the middle. How can ordinary South Africans expect to feel certainly not as bad necessarily as PTSD, but equally dangerous?
Yes, hello, good evening, and good evening to your viewers. I think it's definitely a spectrum. This has been unprecedented in many ways. People that develop syndromes like PTSD and depression, which is quite common, are the one end of the spectrum, but further back on the spectrum are just ordinary individuals who've been exposed to something that they've never had to deal with before. And it talks about the concept of resilience. And resilience is the ability of the human being to be able to handle external stresses. So the resilience is something that has already been weakened in our population generally because of the events that preceded, like COVID-19, the pandemic, in which we're in a third wave, amongst many other things. So the resilience hasn't been that great. So I think we've been sitting ducks for something like this to happen. And I think on the ground, the range is from just still in a state of shock to people starting to kind of experience the physical symptoms of being stressed and anxious. But not necessarily clinically so.
So events don't necessarily just impact our psyche and our emotional and mental well-being. They are also a product of what we feel and how we internalize socio-economic conditions. So what are we as South Africans to take from the events where we saw general lawlessness and in some cases on the other end of the spectrum, rage from South Africans?
So you must remember that most of the people that were carrying out these acts of rioting or looting were on any other day just normal, ordinary individuals. And as we saw across the socioeconomic spectrum. So I think this speaks more to what happens when you gather a group of people and they form what is known as a mob, and the kind of changes in mentality that happens where the individual's self-control and defense mechanisms and personality, in a sense, gets dissolved, and that of the mob takes on a personality of its own. So those characteristics of rage and need and so on speak to very core concepts of humankind, which Freud referred to as the id, the very core of our being. And the defenses that protect us and make us sociable and social beings were stripped away during this time. And that's probably what led what are normally ordinary, everyday, struggling human beings often to carry out acts like they did. This is not unique to South Africa. It's not unique to any race group or ethnicity. It's human nature, and it has occurred in countries all over the world under different circumstances. Understanding that also will give people insights into how to deal with it going forward.
So it's very easy for those not part of the looting to condemn those who were for acts that many people have described as completely lawless, but that on the other end we need to acknowledge stem from desperation, and as you've explained to us, come from the mob mentality where individual values are sort of covered over and put aside by the mob need. So those who took part in looting, ordinary law-abiding citizens one day and criminals the next day, they might be feeling feelings of guilt and shame, unsure of how to deal with the events of the past week. What can we do for them?
So that's an interesting angle, because I don't think anyone's sort of thought about what about the mental health of the people that, again, ordinary people that ended up becoming outlaws and looters and thieves in many ways. So lots of research has gone into trying to understand the aftermath of collective actions like rioting and looting. And they found that in one study in particular, there were up to 75% of the individuals that were involved in the mass action over a period of time, 3/4 of them suffered some kind of mental health problems, ranging again from depression to anxiety and so on. I think it's difficult because our situation is unique. Because it's driven by so many different angles and so many different forces, that I think it would be counterproductive to kind of try and look at this from a good and bad point of view or good and evil point of view. And also I think one also has to be careful of taking a moral higher ground or trying to rationalize this from the point of view of pure poverty. Because as you know, a lot of the stuff and events that we've watched unfold were not related to events, to items related directly to poverty. It's just, it's complicated. And I think to unravel something like this is going to take us a long time. And I don't think anyone has any of the answers right now.
For South Africans watching from whichever stance they watched this unrest unfold, how can we all try and develop more empathy? Because that's ultimately a unifying factor, isn't it?
So one of the interesting things that came out again of all these studies that looked at mass events and looting and rioting is firstly the fact that these events can be equated to natural disasters. They can be equated to armed conflict. They can be equated to all kinds of really difficult events that human beings had to deal with over history. But the one thing that came out of them is the opposite of the collective action that was taken is a collective reaction. And in South Africa, we've seen that the collective reaction has been an amazing banding together of people to kind of unify and come together to provide for that which is lacking, to clean up for that which has been destroyed. And that has proven to be the single most important protective mechanism against long-term individual and community mental health issues. So what we can do is get involved, and what we can do is connect with other people that have been affected and try as far as possible to make it a society that has come together, rather than groups and individuals that belong to any particular subgroup. That is probably the most therapeutic thing we can do right now, and that's been happening. And it's, as I've said to many people today, we've seen the worst of humanity, and now we're seeing the best of humanity, and it's wonderful. It's amazing to see in action.
And that's certainly heartening. I suppose one has to see the darkness in order to see the light. Thank you very much, Dr. Shaquir Salduker, member of the South African Society of Psychiatrists.